All right, let's get to this mock draft situation. Starting at pick 25, just a reminder, we're going through just the scenarios and the potential thoughts about where these teams could go, what their needs are, what sort of players might be available in this range, what have they done in free agency, how is that going to influence what their thought process looks like as they move toward the draft. So picking 25th, we have the Green Bay Packers. Let's start with the needs that you see for Green Bay. Where would you start with where the weak points on that roster are in your mind?
Originally, I was really looking at DB and safety was one, but as I've really looked at the roster and the makeup and who has left this offseason, I think offensive tackle is where, especially where they're slotted in the first round, makes a lot of sense for them. I would say the other need that this team has is maybe a younger running back, but I think that's a day 2 or later addition. I think, yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but running back, there's not a lot of running backs considered in the top 50. Trey Benson from Florida State was the only one that made my top 50, and that was all the way in the 40s. So these are second round or later types of guys. But looking at the other positions, if you look at safety, same kind of thing. It's a weak safety draft. So other than our mascot for this offseason, Cooper DeJean, I think that is he can play safety. And again, that was someone I brought up at the combine that I really like when teams can, and the Packers are good at this usually, of straddling the now and the future. That's idealistically team building. That's what you want to do. DeJean makes sense to me in the sense that what position is he best at? Well, he can go safety. And then if he has to go to outside corner, when something happens there, if Jay Alexander in a couple of years, they move on from that, boom, you can have him at outside corner. I just see that being a nice fit. And that's also kind of where he's being slotted, like as a consensus right now. But I've looked at all of this and I just keep coming back to tackle just because they've lost Bakhtiari. Josh Nijman is off to greener things, hopefully some more sustained success in Carolina. And hopefully I could just watch a little bit more film rather than him rotate at left tackle like the Packers did this year. But this is a great spot to get a tackle, especially how the Packers like to do things and build these guys along. If Troy Fontenot is here from Washington, that is a guy that I see that all 5 spots could play there. But, I think he might go before this. But if you like Amarius Mims from Georgia, who's more of a project-y, but a super high upside offensive tackle, I have him way up there. I think a few of us do as a top 15 type prospect, but teams might be afraid of his medical. So you might drop a little bit right here in the Packers 25. That might be a sweet spot for him. Tyler Guyton is another interesting athlete. He's a tackle from Oklahoma. And then the guy I prefer a little bit more, if you're talking about more of the project guys, is Kingsley Suamataia. Yes, Suamataia, because I'm going to be saying his name a few times on the show, so I might as well practice it now. But he's from BYU. I really like his upside. I'm a big fan of his. I have him on my big board in the early 20s. 25 here would make a lot of sense to me. Another guy that can maybe play this year, but they can build along because they have other guys on the roster like Rasheed Walker that can play there for now. But
He played last year.
He did. And fine.
So
he was
Rasheed
fine.
Walker, I think, acquitted himself well last year, but I think there's no sense in not looking for an upgrade, especially when you don't have a ton of glaring holes elsewhere on the roster at premium positions that you would spend a first-round pick on. So left tackle is the first place that I went. Is there going to be an upgrade on Walker available at 25? The answer might be yes. And Suamataia, who we talked about last week, we were talking about him near the back half of the first round. If the run on maybe that upper echelon of tackles, the Tyler Guytons and the Amarius Mimses, if that's already happened, we talked about Jordan Morgan from Arizona, the guy from BYU, potentially being there for the Ravens and the Chiefs. But if the Packers think this is the spot where we can get an upgrade on what we have, maybe he goes a little bit earlier. So I'm with you on left tackle. I also think guard is potentially in play. So they lose John Runyon in free agency. They have that normal runway of third, fourth round picks that they often use on interior offensive linemen.
Yeah.
So Sean Ryan, guys like that they could potentially plug in. But do they want somebody that they think is an upgrade over that level of player that they just have on the roster? The thing about tackle that I find interesting with the Packers specifically is they haven't spent high draft picks at the position for the most part over the last decade or so. They haven't spent a first round pick on an offensive lineman in 13 years. And it was Derek Sherrod in 2011.
Yeah, that's right.
They've done it in the second round, though. The Jason Myers was a second round pick. Jason Spriggs was a second round pick. So I don't know if that's just, and also part of the reason they're not spending high picks on offensive linemen is they had tackles that were mainstays for a long time. I mean, Bakhtiari was there for a long time. Chad Clifton was there for a long time. So you don't have to spend first round picks on guys when you have Pro Bowl caliber starters there for extended stretches. So I don't know if that's an organizational mindset thing or if that's just the way that the draft has fallen for them over the last 10 to 15 years. But I agree with you on left tackle, and I also think guard. I think safety, though, is definitely something they still have to consider. I mean, even after signing Xavier McKinney in free agency, I mean, the two other guys at that other safety spot right now are Anthony Johnson, who was a 7th-round pick last year, and Benny Sapp. Like, that's what we're talking about. You know, they signed Keyshawn Nixon to a reasonable deal to be their nickel corner, but it still feels like they need another safety somewhere along the way.
I'll say right now before the draft show, if there's a safety gone before pick 40, that's an egregious reach. That is my estimate of the safety position right now. I just do not think there's any guy. I have one guy in my top 50, and I don't think I'm alone on this, because especially how these guys are testing that were up there. Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. Like, they're not testing overwhelming guys. Jaden Hicks from Washington State. So it's really a lot more day 2-ish guys at that position. So it's like that. That's why it stinks for them that they have a need there, but it's like, you don't want to reach that high for a spot.
The nice part about this is they have 41 from the Jets. They have 58, they have 88, and they have 91. They have an extra 3rd-round pick from the Bills. So they've got 6 picks in the top 100. So if they want to hit there, if they have 5 picks in the top 100. So if they want to find some depth at some of these spots somewhere along the way, they absolutely can. And that applies to interior offensive line. And it also applies to linebacker, because linebacker is still a need. They're moving to an even front with Jeff Hafley as the defensive coordinator. So they're going to need 3 off-ball linebackers that they can trot out there. And right now they have about 1.5.
Yeah. That's
so safety, tackle, and linebacker are probably the 3 spots that I would go. And because they have so many picks that they've acquired, I think they're well positioned to address a lot of that.
I do too. And that's why I think the plan for them is they're still a Wolf team, a Ron Wolf team in their thinking, which is trenches first and size and speed first. And so that's, to me, it's like, I think it slots nicely because the needs that they have, safety, linebacker, running back, that's all day 2 where there's a glut of those guys. So, and then here it's like, oh, tackle. We can get a guy at 24 or 25, that mostly would usually go in the top 15. Like, they can find a little bit of value there. I think they're set up pretty nicely for this draft. That's what happens when you nail a draft or a couple drafts in a row and you have the youngest
and you still have picks in your back
make the playoffs. They're set up very nicely in Green Bay. Just really looking at it.
I had a conversation last night while I was down here that when you step back and think about it, it seems self-evident, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it in these terms. We're at the owners' meetings, right? And think about how many bad decisions are made because of ownership. There's the whims of an owner, the impatience of an owner, and the fact that the Packers don't have one. It allows them to operate more in a vacuum than pretty much any other team in the NFL, because we always want to apply that level of thinking to this, right? It's like, okay, if you remove yourself from illogical, irrational thinking, what decisions would you make over a 5 to 10 year period? If you can always take the long view, we know the optimal decisions that you can make. Well, the Packers are in a spot where they can do that. They can always take the long view because there's no one in an office upstairs being like, oh no, you have to do this. You have to do this because we have to sell this many tickets. And I think that's what brings you to a place where they were at the bottom of the league in cash spending last year, in the bottom 5. They won a playoff game. They pushed the Niners in San Francisco, and somehow they have 5 picks in the top 90 again. It's fucking annoying. As a team that roots for a team in this division, it is annoying, the fact that they always seem to be doing this.
And it's so frustrating because no team will ever be able to be run like this ever again. Like, it's just like their own little world they get to operate in. I have people ask me about that. Like, oh, why? Well, the Packers do this. They sit their quarterback for 3 years. It's like, yeah, they can. You don't think like ownership goes, hey, or a team president goes, hey, look at that Brock Osweiler. Why don't we give him a run? That Drew Lock. Like, you get, oh man, we really like that second rounder. My son.
Osweiler pitching.
I don't know why that. I don't know why that name came to my mind. It's like I'm blaming John Elway. He's not even an owner. But it's like, but that's what happens. The politics that happen. You might have some owner that made you take that guy on day 2, and they're like, yeah, I watched that guy in the SEC. Why don't we give him a chance? We don't like the other guy anyways. You just never know how that works out.
The other thing looming for this team, and Brian Gutekunst was addressed it today, and this is going to be the biggest question for the Packers after the draft is over. When does the Jordan Love extension happen, and what does it look like? Because they have $22 million in cap space right now if they wanted to potentially sign another stopgap safety, whatever the second, third wave of free agency looked like. But the financial situation with this team is about to drastically change in the next 12 months. So any sort of cap space figures 2024 and 2025 matter a little bit less for them because of what's coming down the line. All right. Yeah. Speaking of owners, let's get to the Dallas Cowboys here at 24. Before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of this. I wanted to step back and just have like a general Cowboys conversation because what is happening right now with Jerry Jones's public messaging? What
Yeah.
he is saying, none of it makes sense. Like everything he is saying right now sounds like absolute gibberish to me. Did you see today? There were pictures of him just drawing
With the
scribbles
yellow
all over
pad.
that notepad. I just don't know what is going
Yeah.
on there because
Yeah.
he given the chance to back off of this a little bit, he reiterated the all-in thing today. And what they've tried to twist it now, they tried to twist it and say, well, all in is like maintaining the core of players that we have. That's what all in means for us. So paying Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, that's all in for the Cowboys. I just don't understand this. And they're sitting here complaining about, well, you know, the salary cap and we can't spend that much and we got to do more with less because of the salary cap. Your quarterback is a $55 million cap hit right now because you're not getting out in front of this enough. CeeDee Lamb has an $19 million cap hit right now in the fifth-year option because you didn't extend him a year ago or 2 years ago when you could have. Now you're bumping up against the Justin Jefferson thing, so why would he possibly sign an extension? Every single thing they're complaining about is something that in some way was self-inflicted. I just have no sympathy for how they're looking at this, being like, oh, you know, it's tough on us. We got to pay our own guys. Like, this is how it works. Teams all over the league have expensive stars that they manage to pay, and they still maintain flexibility and aggressiveness when they have a window to try to win football games. Somehow you are the team that can't manage this.
The thing is too, is that they like Jerry Jones for all the kind of like stigma about him, everything. He rewards his players and coaches really well. Like he's really good about the Cowboys kind of family. He might make you work out in front of people taking a tour, you know, like a like a circus freak, but he also like he really does take care of you. But I think that it's shocking to me that he wants to take care of his guys. He wants to reward them. Do it early. Why not? Why are you waiting? You know, you can do all these discussions a year early. Wouldn't that show that you believe in them more? That you're paying them before the quote unquote breakout? That we identify that you're an important part of our team. Even the messaging is so easy to sell. They'll never make sense. Talk about,
well, I wonder if he feels burnt.
Too.
I wonder if he feels burnt because of what happened with Jalen Smith and Zeke. So he paid those guys earlier than he had to, and it ended up becoming a disaster. But ever since then, what has happened with some of these extensions? They did this to themselves with Dak by letting him play on the tag and giving him all this leverage. They put themselves in this situation. So I just don't understand it. And I've said this to somebody recently when I was looking at the way that they haven't spent, the way that they've operated. In my mind, the best thing that this team could have done coming into this offseason, I think Dak has a $29 million base salary. If you were a real team, if you were operating like the Packers operate, you would have come into this offseason, gone to Dak and be like, listen, it's time for us to kind of take a step back. You know, we're in a period of transition. Tyron's moving on. Zach's getting a little bit older. You know, we're going to build this thing around CeeDee and Zach. Is there a place where you'd want to get traded to? He's like 30, 31. That if you were operating in an optimal way, that's what they should have done organizationally, rather than letting it go this far with another extension where he's sitting here on a $55 million cap hit that doesn't allow you to add talent to your roster. I just don't understand it. I don't understand any aspect of it.
I don't either. It's so glaring that all these moves are about to happen. It's the same with stuff with the Jags. It's like, you know, you could do this, right? You know, you're able to do this. Like, we know the options. You should know the options. You actually should have more information to make these moves. So yeah, it's a what's a worse way of self-fulfilled prophecy? Self-fulfilled like bed of shit. Like,
that's kind of what it feels like right now.
So poetic, professional writer.
So let's get to these needs because the needs are glaring. If you look at the roster, there are spots where it's like they absolutely need to do something over the next 6 months or so because they can't really field a competent offense right now. And I would start with the offensive line. Right now, as it currently sits, if they move Tyler Smith to left tackle, which we can talk about the prudency of that, Tyler Bass and Brock Hoffman right now are slated to start at left guard and center, respectively, if they end up moving Tyler Smith to left tackle. So whatever you want to do with how you're moving these pieces around, you got at least one, probably two needs for a starting caliber offensive lineman at one of these positions.
Yep. That's exactly what I said that they should do in the first round. I think they shouldn't look anywhere else, especially where they're slotted right now. and where the players that are projected to them, interior offensive line, especially a guy that could play center, especially. And guess what? There are a couple of guys there that actually might make sense for them. Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon makes a lot of sense. I think he's going to need a little bit of time to really, use all of his gifts and use all of his traits, but his mindset is great. I think he's a little wild horse. So you get Zach Martin next to him, that'll calm him down maybe a little bit. And I think that would be good. But even if center doesn't work out, I think left guard he can fill in too, because he has size and athleticism and stuff. So I like that versatility. So that guy, if Graham
How do you feel about moving Smith to left tackle, though?
I thought he was fine as a rookie. So I thought his upside would be at left tackle. I actually was I thought I liked him at guard, but I thought he could maintain, or I could be a long-term starter at left tackle because he had to step in for Tyron as a rookie. And I actually thought he was pretty good. I know there's some people that didn't agree, but I thought he was good. But he's just even better at guard.
To me, it's not. That's my thing. To me, it's not about whether he can do it. I just hate when we have these guys who turn into elite players at one position, and then you think, we'll just move them. We'll just move them and figure it out. I just think it makes you worse at two positions unnecessarily. It's harder to find tackles.
It depends on how they fill it. If they can draft a tackle in the first round, I would love that. If they can get a guy that they think could slot there, then keep Smith at left guard. And also it could be one of those things. Is this guy best at left tackle, left guard? You go through camp. It's going to need investment and time to figure out your best five too. So no, I think Smith still has upside at tackle, and I still think he could be a good tackle. I thought he was pretty good as a rookie. He wasn't great, but he's pretty good. It's easier at guard especially with his skill set. And of course, I think some of his blemishes got hidden. So TBD, I guess, is a long-term answer, but I still think he'd be fine. I think it's just whatever guy is there for them that they think is best on their board. That's where they're slotted. That's where they're slotted at. Because there's tackles that are going to be there. Like, oh man, if Folotanu, I've had to change how Troy Folotanu from Washington were there, they should sprint up and take him because he has 5 position upside along the offensive line. That I think it would be their home run if they didn't move up or do anything, which I don't encourage them to move up.
The other spots, just looking at other needs that they have, probably stuff that they can get a little bit later, right? We talked about running back. Dane doesn't have a top 50 running back. They're picking at 56. So if they want to take one even in the second round, that could potentially be an option for them. Still think they probably need help at linebacker. They signed Eric Kendricks in free agency, but that's some stuff you can do in the middle rounds. And I think like secondary and edge depth. They lost Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler in free agency. That's 750 snaps between them. So offensive line is the most glaring hole, but it's just one of those things again with this team where I look at the roster, I look at the resources, I look at the pathways, and it's just hard for me to imagine them being better than they were last year. And that feels avoidable.
They were threading such a perfect needle last year. The offensive jump they got, I mean, for 8-10 weeks, they're one of, if not the best offense in the NFL. They actually were. I mean, the Brandon Cooks signing ended up working out in the second half of the year. The leap they got from CeeDee Lamb, the offensive line play. I mean, they got decent health from Tyron Smith, which is nothing you could really set your clock to. So I know the defense fell apart in the second half of last year, but as far as what they were doing on offense, that's going to be way hard to duplicate. Brandon Cooks is another year older, So
that's the other position I would throw out.
Receiver, I have them up that up there as well.
Because now Cooks is in the last year of his deal. He's 30.
Yeah.
And you lost Michael Gallup, which, Michael Gallup wasn't a huge contributor last year, but CeeDee Lamb is best in the slot. So you still probably need an outside receiver somewhere along the way just to make the most out of that group. You don't have to spend a first round pick on one, but I think it is a need that is at least worth mentioning when you look at the overall roster construction.
I wouldn't mind one on day 2. No, I'm with you on that.
All right, let's get to our next one here. Minnesota Vikings at 23. Can't really approach this conversation in the same way you can with the others.
I said, are they even going to have this pick? So I actually did every team that I thought they could trade with. So I just had like a bullet point. Yeah.
So I think we should use this space to talk more about the cost of what it might take to get the quarterback and what that is going to mean. Because this to me is a fascinating football experiment. What they're going to have to give up to go up into the top 5. It's very likely this pick at 23, their pick at 11, a first round pick in 2025, and then probably something else. If you look at the history of quarterback trades from outside the top 10 into the top 5. And I get it, right? Like we want a quarterback. We want to get on the rookie quarterback timeline. We can't wait till 11. This was always our plan. But if you look at the roster, there are still holes on the roster There are still plenty of holes. They still need interior defensive line help. They still need cornerback help. They still need interior offensive line help. And that becomes harder to find when you trade all your picks away. I know quarterbacks are important, but if they move up for a quarterback, they won't pick again in this draft until 108. They have 2 4th-round picks. And if they include next year's 1, they've already traded away next year's 2 to get that second first-round pick. So now you won't pick until the 3rd round next year. So you're essentially sitting out the first 2 rounds of 2 straight drafts in order to go up and get that guy. And I think you can make an argument that it's worth it, but we're really going to find out the value of a rookie quarterback contract if this guy isn't an elite player. And that's why I'm so curious about this, because it does feel like an experiment of sorts.
They're min-maxing this shit. I love it. I really do. I love that they're I want to see who they end up with, and then I can have a much further discussion about this of who they actually, if they move up, which they probably will. But I do love this because how the rest of the roster, especially how the rest of the offense, we've kind of said this last year. We were talking about what is Minnesota and what are they, and same with Tennessee. Those two kind of were always felt in lockstep. Like, what are these two teams doing? And with the Vikings, it was, well, it looks like they're setting up their offense to, plop a rookie quarterback in there or a young quarterback in there, and like their defense is kind of a grab bag of, we'll let the defense coordinator figure it out. Well, a year later, sure seems like that, doesn't it? That they're just making the offense ready-made, an ecosystem that a young quarterback can get dropped into, even if it's a guy that they think has to sit. Hey, well, let's Sam Darnold take some bullets first until we're for sure. And then they have a defense with a unique defensive coordinator that can maybe find value in guys that others can't. Brian Flores, probably not going to be the best defense, but at least it'll be hard to play against. Yeah, that was the roadmap, and they're kind of sticking to that roadmap, which is gonna, I think it's, like you say, it's a great thought experiment. I can't wait to see it kind of actually happen. But
if you look at how it'll play out over the next year in just terms of resources, right now they're slated to have $100 million in cap space in 2025. That is without a Justin Jefferson extension. So Justin Jefferson is going to get paid a shitload of money, so that you'll have to account for that. Christian Darrisaw is also up for an extension. I think that's going to happen sooner rather than later. So we've talked about this. They have they have quality tackles on both sides. They have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. And so that's the bet, is if we drop in that guy with that sort of supporting cast, we're going to be able to create an elite offense because of the pieces that we have. And then we can figure the rest out on defense. And if they're paying their quarterback, let's say it's the 3rd overall pick makes $7 million against the cap in 2025, whatever it is, you're still going to have $70 million in cap space to throw around on defense. You can Bengals the defense if you want to, combined with what Flores can do on that side of the ball. So that's the thought, is that if we have this group of offensive support system guys that we can pay full freight because we're playing a rookie quarterback, is that our best path to be a competitive team? I have no idea if the answer is yes, because you have so few picks to build it up with other cheap guys at other positions. But that seems to be the bet that they're making. And I think that's really the only necessary or relevant conversation to have about the Vikings right now.
That's it. This is the bet they think is their best bet. And it's cool. Obviously, it's so easy to say that. It's like, get on the rookie quarterback train. It's like, yeah, we say that with these guys that were taking top 5. Like, yeah, I could do that too. If like that guy, like I have a top 5 pick. We're seeing a team well outside of it, or pick 11, decently outside of it, trying to go, no, we're pushing. If they end up with like a McCarthy, like if they end up with QB3, QB4, it becomes even more interesting, because then was it worth it just for a guy as opposed to one of the guys that, me personally consider as one
that's
of
exactly right. Is it worth it just for a guy is maybe a question that we will be answering.
That's it.
And something worth mentioning here, because I know Vikings fans will probably be pissed if we don't say this, they likely do have 2 third-round cop picks coming in 2025 because they lost Neil Hunter and Kirk Cousins. So
have you seen JJ McCarthy's pressure to sack rate?
So that will help them recoup some of this draft capital. But those are 2 back half of the 3rd round picks. That's pick 99 and 101. You're giving up the first 2 rounds of the draft for 2 straight years to do this. And we've seen it happen, right? Like the Rams did this with Goff, and the way that they built the rest of the roster allowed them to do this. And I think you could make an argument there's probably some similarities there, right? Like we have one elite player, arguably the best non-quarterback in the NFL, that we can pair with a cheap quarterback and we can spend at all of these other positions. That's what the Rams did with Goff, and they played in the Super Bowl with that model. So there is a pathway to doing it if you're going to give up this much for the quarterback, but you need a lot of other stuff to fall into place to make that work. And we're about to see if the Vikings can pull that off.
I love it. I love it. And hey, KOC is he's gonna put a good system around him too. That's another thing is you're dropping.
That's the other bet that you're making. Exactly.
That's the other bet. We're gonna maximize whatever the hell we got, and which I think that's why all this discussion about him. Like, if this were another team doing this, I'd be a little like, haha, like, but a little bit really okay. Like with the Vikings, it's like, well, you guys do have an ecosystem that makes sense to do this. So again, that's why it's gonna be really, really cool to watch.
The 2 times this has worked recently, besides the Rams, the other example of this for it working is you gave up a ton to go up and get the quarterback to get on the rookie quarterback timeline you could spend on the rest of the roster was Wentz. And what eventually it was Foles, right? And we've talked about this. The other element, the other component of those teams doing what they did is that they both had a decided schematic advantage in those seasons. The Rams offense lit the league on fire in 2017 and 2018. The Eagles and what they did with all those RPOs in 2017, teams were not ready for that. So you need an offensive ecosystem led by most likely a play calling head coach on that side to get the most out of this sort of model. And they are set up to potentially do that. And it almost seems like if you look back at history, it almost seems like a non-negotiable piece if you're going to try to do it this way. Because every other team that has done it this way has had that guy in place.
Even think the Chiefs moving up for Mahomes. I have Andy freaking Reid. You know,
that's just the first. That's just an extra first. Like, even if you look at that's it's not
it was RG3
just trading up for a quarterback.
That was RG3 was what 6-2 or 7-2, whatever it was, 9-2. So that was
another one. They gave up a ton for him. But also, again, another example of decided schematic advantage.
That's what I was getting at. Is that they had Kyle Shanahan and Mike Shanahan. So yeah, that's pretty good. And that's staff. So I don't know. This is one. If they get Drake May, then holy crap, draft night's gonna be interesting for me because I'm just gonna be like, okay. But that's the thing. It's like who they end up with is gonna really, really gonna be launching a lot of discussions off of that, like how to picture it all in. Obviously, but I just have to say that.
Let's get to the Eagles at 22. I'm curious where you went here for the most pressing needs for the Philadelphia Eagles heading into this draft.
I think Eagles are a great example of it's not so much needs. It's more like I know what positions they focus on in the first round, which is trenches and corner. I don't think they'll go receiver. But you never know. I don't know, but not sure if they'll go a line. But this is the versatile guy range. All the guys I mentioned, all the 5-spot guys. Do they get a Lane Johnson succession plan on the team? They've done this. They've done this at defensive line and offensive line where they'll inject talent even if they don't need that exact answer at that time. They still have Jeff Stoutland. That opens up all the possibilities. Like everything's available when you have a Jeff Stoutland on your roster, on your coaching staff. Oh, that guy? Yeah, because you can bet on the upside. You can go, well, we see him as this. Well, we'll know because we have the coach that can get him there. Like that's why you bet on that, or why you invest in that. But all depends on what they think of their guys. As it stands right now, sticking with the trenches, I like on the defensive side, Jared Verse from Florida State. I like the fit here. I like where he could potentially go as far as like where he's slotted right now. He's been slotted anywhere from the early teens to the mid 20s. I think 22 is perfect for him. I think he's a run first defensive end. He's all about power, speed to power, speed to power. I like that because of the makeup of the rest of this team, especially up front. They have a little bit more bendy, speedy guys. Depends on what happens with Sweat. I think they're holding on to him, obviously, but I think just the rest of their guys, he makes a lot of sense for kind of, if they stick with Nolan Smith, he works with that. If they, with Bryce Huff, you know, is that he matches with Bryce Huff as being more the run first guy that can push the pocket. So Jared Verse makes a lot of sense to me as opposed to Chop Robinson or Leatu Latu, who are more rush first, pass rush first guys than run first guys. So that's the guy that in this slot that makes a little bit of sense to me as far as a pairing.
It's hard for me to imagine them spending another high draft pick on a pass rusher just because of the guys already on the roster, right? Even if they
might end up
trading his time. Even if they end up trading Hassan Reddick, and if Josh Sweat moves on after this year, they drafted Nolan Smith in the first round last year, and they just spent $18 million a year on Bryce Huff. I know it's only 2 guys, but if they use another first round pick on a pass rusher already with the investments that they've made, that would be a little bit surprising to me, even based on their history, just because it's not the most glaring need to me. I still think offensive line is the thing I would point out, like interior offensive line and what it looks like right now without Kelsey and with like, and Steen and whoever else at right guard. They signed Matt Hennessy in free agency, and then corner. Like, even if they already have 2 starting corners nominally, it does seem like getting younger at corner to me would be more of a priority than adding another pass rusher, even when you think about Howie's history. The other spot that I would say is safety. Do they figure they need somebody to step in? Sidney Brown, obviously they drafted in the 3rd round last year, but do they need one more safety if CJ Gardner-Johnson is going to play in the slot for them? How do they view his role? Because obviously they added him after moving on from Avonte Maddox. So just one more guy potentially on the back half of the defense, in the middle of the defense. And so you mentioned a couple of the pass rushers, and this is the area where there are a lot of corners available if they do choose to go corner. We talked about Kool-Aid McKinstry last week, Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, who you mentioned. Do they see DeJean as somebody that can play safety and then play corner eventually? So if they do go DB, this does feel like a range where a lot of those guys will potentially be available.
Yeah. Yep. The receiver one was just what I actually liked. I've been thinking about it because they signed Devontae Parker. And so I think he'll be on the outside. So I was like, does that mean Devontae Smith's going to be on the inside now? Is he going to be a slot guy for them? Is it going to be AJ? Because Kellen Moore does the traditional positions, XFZ. So I'm curious what that unlocks for Brown Smith. Sorry, I just had that side thought because I was starting to look at the receiver depth. It's like, oh yeah,
I think that's a good thought, though, because Quez Watkins moved on. Because Quez Watkins signed with the Steelers today. So receiver is definitely worth mentioning, because even with those 2 guys on the roster, you could argue that they still have a need there. I'm curious, we've talked about some of the resources with these teams. They have $33 million in cap space right now, but they're already up against it for next year. AJ Brown goes from 12 million to 26 million next year. There's a chance that they trade Reddick, so they'll have even more cap space this year. So what their cap situation looks like is just unique compared to other teams, because they're going to get really expensive at some spots next year, even though they currently have a lot of cap space. So, and then the other thing is that they have an extra 2 from the Saints. So if you're looking at just positions of need and where they could go, that extra 2nd round pick is just in their back pocket from that Saints trade a couple years ago. All right, let's get to the Miami Dolphins here at 21. Your biggest need as you looked at the Miami Dolphins roster here?
Offensive line. If they don't go offensive line, I'm going to go straight to the 305 and just scream at them and say, hey, you guys need this for your season to succeed. You guys need this. You guys realize that, right? 2 years in a row, you guys need this. You need general health. You need offensive line health. And I get it. You're in the Shanahan offense. You think you guys are bulletproof. Don't need to invest in the offensive line. Get a guy. Just draft one of them. There's so many of them, and it doesn't matter what spot. Okay, Jordan Morgan, Troy. Now I got all the guys, the names I'm now struggling with. Talise Fuaga, Graham Barton, Jackson Powers Johnson, Amarius Mims. If you love your talented injured guys, go for Amarius Mims. It fits your profile. It's perfect. Kingsley. I'll just go Kingsley BYU. That's where we're going with now. Kingsley, perfect. Another athletic guy. Is he left tackle, right tackle? Doesn't matter. It's just Foltanu. All 5 spots. What spot is the best bet? Doesn't matter. Starting offensive lineman that's a 1st rounder with pedigree, doesn't have injury history. He does not have injury history. Let's go with that. So if they go receiver, I saw Mike McDaniel talking to Xavier Worthy. If you go receiver because he ran a 4.21 in the 1st round, I will lose my mind. I don't care how awesome their offense is. I don't care how much I love Mike McDaniel and what he does on offense. If they do that, they go with the shiny toy stuff. I'm like, it's fun. It's going to be great, but I would be really upset if I were a Dolphins fan, because I'm like, this isn't good team building. This is just shiny toy syndrome.
And even beyond team building, they've run into a wall at the end of the season for the last 2 years. And I think their inability to be flexible on offense is something that's worth bringing up here. And the offensive line is what is going to give you that ability to be flexible. So they lost Robert Hunt and Connor Williams in free agency. They signed Aaron Brewer to like a, starting level center deal, and that's fine. If he's going to be your center, great. I think that makes sense. But right now, they signed Isaiah Wynn to a 1-year deal, and Liam Eichenberg is still on this roster at guard. So them drafting a guard in the 1st round in this range where there are going to be plenty of them available almost makes too much sense.
Yeah. It's been the easiest team for me to balk every time I do a mock draft. Yeah, just whatever lineman sitting there that I'm like, yeah, whatever one I want to write about for the Dolphins in this one. Okay, Jordan Morgan, you can play tackle and guard. Pooh, cool. You guys need tackles and guards. Sweet, that would make sense. Like,
Then
no
that
matter
one I
what, it
like
makes sense.
because it's a similar conversation to the Niners, right? Where we were talking
Oh,
about them needing a
exactly more.
guard and then maybe moving to left tackle eventually. Terron Armstead's not going to be there forever. He's probably got
No,
maybe another year or so. So if you wanted to draft a guy that can play guard for you in 2024 and then be your succession plan at left tackle, very similar to the conversation we have about San Francisco, I think that applies here.
Morgan's been a guy that I kind of like for Shanahan offenses, and maybe it's just maybe I got in my head early, but he's just always comes up with the Dolphins for me is Morgan for whatever reason. I see it for whatever reason when I'm writing up these mocks and the player fits.
Just talking about some other needs, even if offensive line, I agree, is the most glaring. Safety. They signed Jordan Poyer, but it's a 1-year, $2 million deal. So I think if you're paying attention to that, they still probably need another safety next to Javon Holland. And then interior defensive line. They lose Christian Wilkins in free agency. Yep. So they signed some flyers in free agency, and Neville Gallimore from Dallas, Benito Jones from the Lions. But these are short-term, very cheap deals. So safety and defensive line somewhere along the way, I think probably should be addressed for them. Yeah. Those are the only other two that I had.
That's it. I just put trenches and then I had all the line notes, but yeah, defensive line is the other one too. And especially you could really just pick a spot and I would understand the answer. It's just injecting talent for both sides of the trenches.
We've talked about most of the guys that could potentially be in play here, all of the interior offensive line guys, all of the tackle to guard guys. The name we have not mentioned that I will throw out for the first time, and I'm curious what you think about this. He may be gone already, but if they do think interior defensive line is the best way to go here, this is the first time we probably mentioned Brian Murphy from Texas if he falls this far. So he's the most, impactful high-level interior defensive lineman available in this draft. Do they think that is their best route because they can find interior offensive line help a little bit further down the draft, even though they don't have a third-round pick? That's worth mentioning.
Yeah, and this is right. I would say the tail end of Murphy's range. I'd say this is exactly where I think he would go, 15 to 22-ish, 14 to 22-ish. That's kind of where I picture him. No, that's a great one. For me, that's the defensive fit with him. But I gotta unbreak my brain with that a little bit, where I'm like, oh, they run a little 3-down stuff. He's more of a 4-3-3, 3 tech and everything. Honestly, watching defenses around the league right now, there's none of that anymore. Where it's like, no, we need this type of guy. Guys just make it work. They just go, oh, we'll put him at D end on pass rushing downs. We're good. Like, they make it work. We don't need those traditional body types. So
well, also
I'm saying what I like that more than initial assessment, kind of like just going off what their personnel or how they use their personnel.
Well, they're also transitioning defensively, right? So Anthony Weaver's now there as the defensive coordinator. He comes over from Baltimore. I mean, you drop Byron Murphy into what they asked Justin Madubuike to do.
Madubuike. Boom. Yeah. That's perfect. That is a 1-for-1.
Let's get to the Steelers at 20. I think that there are a couple pretty obvious needs. I'm curious if we had the same ones. Where did you start here?
I had O-line and corner. That's where I ended up at. All the interior linemen, I would love for them. Jackson Powers, Johnson, Barton, all the guys that we mentioned all the time. Barton from Duke, I should mention that again. But corner for me, because I loved what saw Joey Porter Jr. last year, and I just like, let's drop another outside corner there. Would stop this kind of rotating cast that we keep doing at this position in Pittsburgh. And if a Quinion
they have Dante Jackson as part of that Deontay Johnson trade, but he's only under contract for 1 more year.
This year, right? That's it. Yep. But for me, it's if they have Terran Arnold might be gone by this point, but corners again, it's eye of the beholder. And this is a bunch of guys in this range. He's from Alabama. He can play outside. He can play inside. I think his feistiness, his IQ is very Pittsburgh. And how they can use him. They like to do some zone stuff. They do a little bit of everything. He's kind of good for that. And he's going to be used to what they ask of their corners, having more eyes on the quarterback. Transitions nicely from Alabama. So he's a guy that actually I like that fit. He is right now being slotted as the better of the 2 Alabama corners over Kool-Aid McKinstry. We talked about this on the Idiot's Guide. Kool-Aid and him kind of swapped over the season. But I don't know where he'll end up going, but this might be the tail of his range. And then that's the other corner that I have highly, a lot of us have highly up there, is Quinion Mitchell from Toledo. Any team would like him, and I think he fits in any defensive scheme. But those two, to me, could be, I think, more impactful for the Steelers than they would be for other teams, especially just what they have on their makeup and the rest of their roster, and especially what their mindset is, kind of just always push. Kind of like, hey, we got Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. Yeah, let's go again. Mike Tomlin.
If they drafted a corner, I'd be curious how the roles would end up shaking out after the Dante Jackson trade. Again, that's not a long-term answer, but if you could drop a guy that you drafted in the first round into the nickel role, and when Dante Jackson moves on next year, you pop him outside, I think that does make a lot of sense. Safety, they brought in Deshaun Elliott, but they have some bodies that they've maintained next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. That feels like it's worth mentioning. They signed Patrick Queen in free agency, so linebacker is probably less glaring than it was near the end of last season. I'm going offense, though, because I think, to me, the two most glaring needs they probably have, you could argue three. Receivers still. All respect to Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson, I think they probably need to invest in receiver somewhere in the first 2 days of the draft, and I would be surprised if they didn't at this point. And then the other two spots, left tackle. Dan Moore is still there. Congratulations to Dan Moore. He's been there forever, it feels like, holding down that left tackle spot as a fourth-round pick, but he's in the final year of his deal, and I think they could use an upgrade there no matter what. And center still. I think they probably could use an upgrade at center, and where they do that, I think, is still a question. But left tackle, wide receiver, center, I still think are three needs that probably need to be addressed on that side of the ball.
I'm curious if they kick Broderick Jones over. That's if they want to move him over.
It's a very good question.
The receiver stuff, I picture Steelers always being day two. So I don't for receiver. They've had some luck with it. I wouldn't change my philosophy either. So I think that's why I picture them focusing on that position. Because I agree. I think they do need another receiver. Obviously, they just moved on from Johnson. I'm not betting on Calvin Austin playing more than 5 snaps a game. Want to guess why? You know how much Calvin Austin weighs? About the same as Xavier Worthy, maybe smaller. Calvin Austin's a good football player, though. I wish he was 180, 190 because his toughness and everything is actually good. But Van Jefferson, watch him in Atlanta, outside of the Rams. No, he's a bottom of the roster kind of playable guy, like a receiver 5, ideally, a receiver 4. So I do agree with that, the receiver spot. The corner, it just kept coming back to me. It was corner or Jackson Powers Johnson. Not just even Graham Barton or anything. It was just Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. So he's the name for this show, I guess. But like that was the for the Steelers, was that one made a lot of sense for me, especially how they like to bring guys along.
Which wide receiver would you like to see in this offense? It doesn't necessarily have to be a first-round pick, but is there a receiver from this class that if you were trying to pair with what Arthur Smith likes to do that you think would make the most sense for Pittsburgh?
Oh, they don't have this pick, but Dunze would be amazing for them. Actually, like Jalen Polk from Washington, Dunze's teammate, and he's a day 2 type of guy. I have him graded a little higher than other people, but he's being considered kind of like a middle day 2 guy, late second, early third. He would actually be a great fit. Kind of could play Z. He actually has great synergy with George Pickens. Pickens is a traditional X. So you have a Z, not the fastest guy. So we might get into our Falcons conundrum of no juice downfield as we try to do all this play action game with Arthur Smith.
If he's not explosive, though, he is a downfield threat. Like he's a ball. He goes up and gets it. So by the way, if you haven't noticed, I've started watching the Washington offense.
The Washington receivers?
Yes,
isn't it fun?
I can't
3 guys back on guys.
So just spoiler alert, later this week, we are doing the quarterbacks. So I've started watching all of the quarterbacks, and I watched the Washington offense in earnest this weekend for the first time. I queued up like 3 games on the plane. The Washington offense rules.
It's awesome.
I can't even get over how cool the Washington offense is.
I know it's not going to be to the same level, but I'm glad to see what they'll look like in the NFL because the OC.
I'm so pumped.
So because it translates. It translates to the NFL because it's not unbalanced stuff. It's stuff that translates to the NFL. So that's why I'm curious to see it.
I was having a conversation with somebody last night about this, and I think that why it's such a cool idea for the NFL is even if it's a much wider offense, it's very spread out. But I think a lot of the ideas that they're bringing are it aligns with what successful NFL offenses look like, but it's almost taking it in a slightly new direction. It's like an iteration on what successful NFL offense looks like. So if you're going to make a bet on that, that's cool. Like that is the type of bet I would make if I was bringing a college offensive coordinator to the league. Like what they're doing with motions, stacks and bunches. It's a vertical offense, but it has a lot of answers built into it. It is very sound and applicable to the NFL game, but it's like on steroids. Like it's just turning it up just a little bit, which is why I think it's very cool.
When I watch college offenses, I will have some snootiness to me where I'm like, oh, I don't know what that concept is. What is that? Like, that's not sound. There's no check down over there. I watch Washington's offense, and that's why I'm comfortable in being optimistic about and praising it because it's good ball. It's like
Yeah.
what you just said. It's sound, but it's cranked up. It's got some gimmick to it, but I shouldn't say like it's not hokey gimmick. It's like no, it's more just creating an advantage. Hey, we're gonna go tempo here. Hey, we're gonna do a bunch of shifting and motioning. Guess what the good offenses do in the NFL? That's what they
Exactly.
do.
Yep.
It's not the smoke and mirrors BS that we see some of these RPO stuff. They'll sprinkle it in, like but that's not leaning on that. No, I'm excited to see it. It reminds me a little as where it's a traditional offense with new twists. This is a personal, and this I know his name is not in the standing in 2024 that was back in the day, is when my dad hired Scott Linehan. He was the
Mhm.
OC at Louisville, and he was a very innovative at the time offense with modern, or at the time, pro concepts, but he added some college twist to it and then came to Minnesota and it worked out well. But it's the same kind of transition there.
Was watching them. We're going farther down the rabbit hole here, but I was
Oh,
really
go
blown
for
away
it.
by watching it. They're using like like stacks and bunches, but the bunch is like 5 feet away from the sideline. So the bunch that they're using is like 20 yards away from the center.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of ideas again that are translatable, but you're watching it in a slightly different way than you have. But then you see them running choice routes
That's it.
from the bunch in a college system. So it just
Y cross,
there's so
choice
much
routes. Yep. It's all
there's
the
so
good
much
stuff.
overlap with what you want to see from the NFL, but it's just turned up in a little bit of a different way, which is why I'm very interested in it as my legs go out.
No, that's great. No, Dunes, or sorry, the original question on this was Jalen Polk. So, another one that maybe like in his offense is Troy Franklin from Oregon. He's a little skinny, but he scraps and blocks, and he can get downfield a little bit. He would add a little bit of juice, so that'd be another day 2 type of guy. I'm not sure if he's a perfect fit, but that's one that can add some juice. So, would you think of Caleb Williams versus Cal? By the way, I meant to ask you about that.
Oh, I don't want to get too far down there. I don't want to.
Because we're doing the quarterback show.
We're doing the quarterback show this week.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're gonna have a very extensive Caleb Williams conversation here in about 48 hours. So I'm looking forward to that,
isn't it?
It is very fun, and I'm looking forward to digging into that with you guys. Last one here, the Rams picking at 19. This one's pretty easy for me. It just defense, right?
Okay,
like what are their needs? Defense. If you look at their offense is set
pretty well. It's set.
They don't really need anything. You can make an argument that maybe you try to get another receiver somewhere along the way. I mean, because you probably need a third guy. But other than that, like the offensive line is well positioned. Obviously they spent on it in free agency. We know about the skill position talent. To me, defense in a bunch of different ways. You could go edge, you could go defensive tackle, you could go secondary. I would understand any of those directions in the first couple rounds.
This is where I had Byron Murphy's name first written down. It was right here.
First one I had listed.
So 1-for-1 with Donald. That's exact. They have he's not to Donald's level. No one is ever going to be, but he has the same kind of play style as far as he's a gap shooting 3-tech. It would make a lot of sense for me is that they just want to go, hey, but splash that up. He creates explosive plays for the defense. Great synergy with Kobe Turner. I like if those two together would be perfect as a 1-2 or inside kind of pairing. My dream situation for the Rams, though, is if they go offense and they go Brock Bowers. People
that's just greedy, man. That's just greedy at this point.
Dream situation that people, I'm not doing the tight end. Oh, they might make fun of me on Twitter, and tight ends take a while to do all this. And they say something smart about why they go with Bowers. And I just watched Bowers. I just wrote about Bowers. Bowers is a power slot. He is, but can play tight end and can play outside receiver. He is a Cooper Kupp replacement for the long term, not a outside receiver replacement. That is just me because I want to see Sean McVay use him and just watch magic unfold. I think he'll go before that. My other dream situation was Cooper DeJean for his defense because
that is reasonable.
That one's reasonable.
We are now in the Cooper DeJean range where I think it's worth.
I ruined my own joke because I was going to go DeJean first, but then I got too excited. I want to talk about Bowers, but then But if we're going to stick with defense, DeJean actually makes a lot of sense for them. The whole discussion, safety, slot, outside corner. He injects talent into a defense that needs needle movers. He could do that.
They still need corner help even after signing Darius Williams. They still need safety help even after signing Cam Curl. And the Cam Curl contract, we have not talked about that really. I mean, they got him at a really decent price.
Really like that one. Yeah. I know Rams, good offseason so far. They've done some nice moves.
But even with those moves, they still could use some help in the secondary, and they still need help along the defensive line. You mentioned interior. If they went Byron Murphy, if he was there, I think that makes total sense. But this is a spot where the edge rushers would be applicable. Latu from UCLA, Chop Robinson, whatever flavor they wanted to go with at that spot, they need defensive line help and front four help. And I think that if you look at all these spots, it honestly feels like they're sitting in a really nice range
Great.
we've talked about this as the offense draft where the first 12 picks may be offense. Well, this offense is set up. They don't really need much help on offense. So them picking 19 and being able to get the third or fourth or fifth best defensive player in the draft where they're picking, I actually think is it sets up very well for them when you consider their needs and where they are.
It was a good draft for them to have all their picks. Because they can add those supplemental pieces. It really was. I'm joking, but that's serious.
Talking about them having a first round pick is a new experience. I'm looking forward to even that. The fact that they get to make one.
It's a very weird. Yeah, it definitely is. Because again, we not much to go off of here. It's usually someone else's team taking this pick top 5 or in the 20s in recent years. But I think they're set up nicely to add a nice kind of like, I'm trying to like find a good term for it, a complementary piece that can be a needle mover, like grow into a guy that's a true, like, this guy could be a Pro Bowler, and they're set up nicely for that, for exactly what you pointed out, that I think it's going to be so offense, so heavy that they can maybe get some guys that drop to them. That was like, oh, usually this guy might go 12. I can get him at 19, not even have to do anything. So, which might be boring for Les Snead and Sean McVay. But I think boring might be good for them because I think so far their kind of boring moves have been really good this offseason. I like where they're
and that's what you hope. Can they get another draft class that feels, not like last year's, because obviously they crushed that out of the park, but can you get a couple of contributors this year on defense where you got some youth on defense, you've got some explosiveness on defense, you combine it with what their offense could potentially look like, and what does this team look like in the NFC? You can see the path that they could potentially follow. And I think it's pretty exciting. So that defensive player that they could potentially get in the first round and the defensive guys they'll draft early in this draft, if those guys hit quickly, this team becomes pretty interesting, pretty fast.
Yes.
All right.
About the Rams.
That's all we got. We'll be back next week doing 18 through 12, I think. Next week is 18 to 12, and then we'll do 11 through 6 and then 1 through 5. So we will hit every first round pick along the way. And a lot of Panthers fans have asked, we will talk about the 33rd pick as well. We will give a cursory conversation about the Panthers somewhere in this exercise because you guys deserve it.
I apologize. I actually do apologize, Panthers fans, because I actually kind of, even in my mocks, I haven't even thrown you a bone there. So I actually, my bad there.
We'll see when we do it. Doing it after handing Caleb Williams to the Bears seems like a cruel time to do it.
Reverse right back. Here we go. Actually, might be it.
That feels mean, but it might be the best time to handle it. But we will talk about the Panthers somewhere along the way here. The Browns don't have a pick until like the 50s, and we're not going to talk about the Browns, unfortunately. So sorry for Browns fans in this exercise, but we'll talk about you plenty elsewhere. Exactly. We've already talked about them enough. All right, guys, that's all we've got. Sincerely appreciate you listening. We will be back on Thursday, like we mentioned, talking quarterbacks with Dane. A lot to dig into. Caleb Williams conversation. We'll talk about Drake May, talk about the other guys maybe outside of the top 2, where Jaden Daniels is going to fall, what JJ McCarthy looks like as a prospect. All of that stuff is coming in earnest a little bit later this week. So until then, sincerely appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you soon.